My mom shaved her head with me during chemotherapy. I promised her that I would grow hair for both of us. And now my dad's fiancée says, "Cut it off, you're ruining my wedding photos." I lost my mom when I was 17, but before that, in the quiet, terrifying days of hospital beds and whispered prayers, we made a vow to each other that anchored us through the storm. My name is Natalie, and I was diagnosed with cancer just before my junior year of high school. The day I started losing my hair, my mom stood beside me in the bathroom, took the clippers from my shaking hand, and shaved her own head first, smiling the whole time even though I could see her heartbreak flickering just beneath her bravery. We promised each other that once the chemo was over, once I beat this thing, we would grow our hair back together, strand by strand, inch by inch, as a sign that life continued, that we had made it through. I held on to that promise like a lifeline, not knowing then that she wouldn't be there to keep it. I survived, but she did not. Just months before I finished my treatment, pneumonia took my mother from me in a quiet, cruel rush that no one saw coming. While I was fighting for my life, tethered to IVs and blood counts, she had been quietly putting her own health last, sleeping in waiting room chairs, skipping doctor appointments, hiding her fever behind Tylenol and smiles. She didn't tell anyone how sick she was until it was too late, until she was already being admitted herself, and by then her lungs were too far gone. I remember holding her hand in that sterile room, her skin cold and her breathing uneven, whispering through tears that I would keep the promise we made. I told her I would grow my hair not just for me but for both of us. I would carry our vow forward even if I had to do it alone. 5 years later, my hair flows past my shoulders in thick, soft waves, and sometimes when the sun hits it just right, it catches the same golden warmth hers used to have. It's not just hair to me anymore. It's memory, it's promise, it's proof of survival stitched into each strand. There were days in the beginning when I almost gave up and wanted to cut it, moments when the grief was so sharp it felt like growing it without her was pointless, almost cruel. But I pushed through. I brushed it gently, I trimmed the ends with care, and I talked to her through the mirror like she could still hear me. Now when I see myself, I don't just see a girl who lived. I see my mother's hand smoothing the back of my head, her voice telling me I'm strong, and the deep, unwavering love that stood by me even in death. My father met Karen about 2 years after Mom passed, and though it was hard at first to imagine anyone else beside him, I tried to be supportive. He deserved happiness and she seemed decent enough, reserved but warm in a careful, distant way, like someone still figuring out their place. I didn't feel any immediate connection to her, but I also didn't feel any reason to push her away. Her daughter Ava was my age, quiet, observant, the kind of person who lingered in doorways rather than joining the conversation. Still, she wasn't unfriendly and I appreciated that. There was this unspoken understanding between us, like we were both strangers in a house that had too many memories. And so I tried. I really did. I told myself we were building something. Maybe not a family, but at least a version of peace. 6 months after they started dating, my father proposed to Karen. It was quiet, not some big grand gesture, just a dinner announcement one evening, and I remember nodding and smiling, genuinely wanting to be happy for him. He looked relieved, like he had been holding his breath for years. Karen started planning immediately, and I even got involved, helping her look at venues, folding sample invitations, suggesting color palettes that matched the backyard garden they wanted to use. I was trying to show her that I was invested, that I accepted her. Then one afternoon she invited me over to her place. She said she wanted to discuss some of the wedding details, just the two of us, as a kind of bonding moment. I brought my notebook and my willingness to be helpful, but what followed was not what I expected at all. And as I settled onto her couch with my notes in hand, expecting to talk about flowers or seating charts, she turned to me with this overly gentle voice and said that she had a small request. She told me that for the sake of visual harmony and wedding aesthetics, I should consider cutting my hair. I blinked, unsure I had heard her correctly, but she went on to say that my hair was out of character with the general style of the bridal party. She said that all the bridesmaids would be wearing their hair up and that my hair, long, dark, and reaching the middle of my back, was simply too long for symmetry. I sat there frozen, feeling my stomach twist because she didn't know. She didn't know what my hair meant to me, what it meant to my mom, or what we had promised each other when I had no eyelashes, no eyebrows, no hope left in my bones. And now she was asking me to cut it for a photo. For symmetry. Like it was just hair. I took a deep breath and told her everything, the way someone does when they're trying not to cry in front of someone they don't fully trust. I told her about my mother sitting beside me during my treatment, how she had shaved her head the same day I did, how we had laughed through tears at our matching baldness, and how we had made a quiet promise that once I got better, we would grow our hair back together, strand by strand, inch by inch. I told her that after my mother passed, my hair had become more than just something on my head. It was a piece of her, a living memory that reminded me every day of what we fought for. Karen nodded slightly, eyes unreadable, and when I finished, she didn't pause to offer compassion. She just tilted her head and said in this practiced, almost patronizing tone, "Your mom wouldn't want you to be stuck in the past." Like that single sentence was supposed to sever years of grief, healing, and love, just to make a Pinterest board wedding a little more cohesive. Then she smiled like she had just offered me a cup of tea instead of a demand that gutted me and said, "It's just a haircut for family harmony." I sat there, stunned, the weight of her words hitting me like a slow-building storm. For a second I couldn't even respond. How do you begin to explain that what she was calling just a haircut was, to me, sacred? That every inch of my hair was grown with pain, survival, and memory? How could she possibly speak so casually about my mother's wishes? Someone she had never met, someone whose name she probably only ever said when trying to comfort my father in those early months of grief. I stared at her, heart pounding, realizing that she would never understand, not because she was incapable, but because she didn't want to. So I stood up slowly, not trusting myself to speak without crying or shouting, grabbed my things and left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't slam the door. I just walked out because that's what you do when someone tries to erase a part of your soul and calls it harmony. When I walked through the door, I could tell by the way my dad was sitting on the couch that Karen had already gotten to him. His hands were folded, his brows pinched with that familiar look of someone caught between two people he cared about but didn't quite know how to stand up for either. He looked at me and said softly, almost pleadingly, "Maybe you could compromise just this once." His voice carried that weariness I had grown used to since my mom passed, like every emotional decision was too heavy, like peace was the only currency he had left to trade. But I didn't hesitate. I didn't cry. I just looked him in the eye and said, "Compromise means not breaking the vow I made to my mother." And I meant every word. Because this wasn't about a wedding or hair or even Karen. It was about a promise made in the quiet ache of sickness, in a hospital room where survival was uncertain. It was about love. And no amount of tired pleading could undo what that promise meant to me. After that conversation with my dad, it was like someone had flipped a switch and unleashed a coordinated attack from every possible direction. My aunt messaged me first, her tone wrapped in a passive-aggressive ribbon, telling me that growing up means knowing when to bend. Then my grandmother chimed in, reminding me that family peace is more important than appearances. The cousins followed, one by one, all echoing the same tired sentiment, that I was being stubborn, selfish even, for holding on to something they couldn't understand. And then, as if the guilt wasn't enough, my cousin Ellie forwarded me screenshots from a group chat I wasn't supposed to see. It was a thread full of Karen, her daughter Ava, and several of my extended family members, all dissecting my hair like it was a political act instead of a living piece of memory. Karen had written, "She's just doing this to get attention. That vow thing is a crutch. Her mother wouldn't want this kind of drama at our wedding." And in that moment, seeing my grief and love reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience, I realized that no amount of explaining would make them see. Because they never knew my mother. They never shaved their head in a cold bathroom, holding each other's hands and whispering, "We'll do this together." In the chat, Karen painted me as a hysterical, attention-seeking child who was determined to sabotage her perfect day. She complained that I was ruining her wedding and went on to say that my hair was overshadowing Ava, that it was humiliating for her daughter because her carefully planned updo looked less impressive in comparison to my long natural hair. She made it sound like I was deliberately trying to outshine her, like my presence was an act of defiance rather than quiet grief. What cut even deeper than her words was the silence that followed them. No one in that chat stood up for me. Not a single person said, "This isn't fair," or, "Let's remember what that hair means." Instead, they let her narrative settle, and by doing so, they let her version of me take root. One that had nothing to do with the person I actually was or the promise I had made to my mother in the most fragile chapter of our lives. I handed my father the old worn-out notebook that had traveled with me through hospital rooms and sleepless nights, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were my scribbled thoughts from chemo sessions, notes of pain and hope, and the moment I described in shaky handwriting how my mother and I sat in the bathroom, side by side, shaving our heads with trembling hands and quiet courage. On the next page was her voice, her words echoing back at me, "When it's over, we'll grow it back together." As my father read in silence, his fingers trembled slightly, and the pages rustled in the quiet. He didn't speak, didn't try to offer excuses or find words to soften the truth. For the first time, I saw the weight of what I carried reflected in someone else's eyes. And in that moment of silence, something shifted, Not in Karen's favor, not toward reconciliation, but in the deep place where grief and memory live, where loyalty is born not out of convenience, but out of love that never asked me to cut myself to fit. I handed him the screenshots next, every petty comment and manipulative twist of truth laid bare in group chat messages that painted me as a selfish, attention-seeking obstacle to Karen's picture-perfect fantasy. He sat there quiet, reading them all. There was no anger on his face, just a kind of quiet resignation, a realization that the woman he thought he was building a future with had no respect for the past that shaped his daughter. The next day, without fanfare or confrontation, he packed her things into boxes. Her clothes, her makeup from the bathroom counter, even her carefully arranged wine glasses in the kitchen. But what hit me the most was when he pulled out old, dusty boxes from the garage. Boxes that had belonged to my mother, which Karen had once tried to toss out, claiming we needed to make room for new memories. He put them beside Karen's things without a word. And just like that, he made his choice. The wedding was called off quietly, no announcements, no dramatic speeches. Just the quiet act of choosing respect over convenience, memory over decor. My father started therapy soon after, something I never thought I'd witness from the man who had built silence into a form of survival. And with that step, the distance between us began to dissolve. We started talking, not in the vague, polite way we used to, tiptoeing around the grief like it might crack open if we looked too closely, but as two people who had endured a storm and were finally brave enough to sit in its aftermath. He told me with tears in his eyes that he had been so scared of being alone again, of the cold echo in a house without laughter, without warmth, that he'd ignored the way Karen slowly tried to edit my mother out of every room, every story, every part of us. He apologized, not just for not seeing it sooner, but for not protecting the memory of a woman who had been more than just his wife. She had been my anchor, and now at last, he was beginning to understand that she still needed space at our table, even if only in spirit. Today I am standing in front of the mirror with my mother's photo in my hands, and my reflection stares back with quiet strength that I didn't know I had carried all these years. My hair, long and shining in the morning light, brushes against my arms like a reminder of everything we endured together. Every needle, every hour in the hospital, every whispered prayer in the dark when I was sure I wouldn't make it. I didn't cut it. I couldn't. Not for someone else's idea of beauty, not for a wedding that tried to erase the history stitched into every inch of who I am. I kept it because promises made in the rawest, truest moments of love deserve to be honored. My mother kept hers until the very end, and I carry mine forward now, not just in my hair but in the way I choose to live. With memory, with love, with defiance when I have to. Because I remember and I will never forget. Vows to those we love are sacred even when the world asks us to forget. I no longer ask myself whether my choice is right because deep down, I know it is mine and hers, stitched together by memory and meaning, not ceremony or approval. Even if no one in the family understands, even if their silence weighs heavy at times or their judgments sting, I have kept something far more sacred than harmony or tradition. I have kept a promise made in the shadow of survival, in a room filled with quiet fear and brave love. I have kept not just my hair, but the vow that made me feel connected to her even after the world took her away. And in doing so, I have chosen truth over performance, devotion over convenience. That, more than any wedding, any gown, any updo or flower arrangement, is the kind of loyalty I will never regret.